What's up everybody, this is Willie and today I wanted to make this Survivor video where I run through every season and rate which voting confessional I personally think is the best. So I just go season by season to make my selection, and for my personal assessment, a good voting confessional is one that really sticks to my mind when I think about ones that came from that respective season, as well as how strong the lines were that were delivered in those respective confessionals. So that's how I'm going to make my assessment, and I also want to glean in that I'm going to be only making my selections up to Survivor 48, where currently right now Survivor 49 is airing, so I cannot possibly make a selection from it as the season isn't done yet. Also, I want to acknowledge a personal fact of my experience with Survivor, where I started watching since HHH, where I haven't really watched any season prior to it, so I'm not going to be able to articulate as much of the context surrounding the voting confessions I choose from those seasons, but I'll do my best I can to make it as rigorous as possible based on research and other info I found. So with all that being said, let's get into it. Okay, so let's start off with Survivor Borneo, which being the fresh start of Survivor, there is quite a lot of confessionals, I'll just say. I mean, I could give an honorable mention to Sean for gleaning in on his dumb alphabet strategies in his confessionals, but it was never going to be close. So straight up, what I ended up picking was Greg Bue's voting confessional against Jenna, because he gives off this memorable line of first time for paranoia, second time for irritation, and third time because my ear infection is clearing up, which I know this is a very iconic one, and it would be preposterous if I don't pick this one, as it does seem to stick to my mind when I think about good voting confessionals from this season. Next up was Survivor Australian Outback, which considering the season I know is not really regarded too highly, and seeing how it did have a factor in these voting confessionals where they are not as peak level to many other seasons in comparison. So some of the choices I would have to make are going to come off extremely random, but hey, I have to make a choice for the interest of it. So for Australian Outback, I just decided to select Colby's voting confessional for Jerry, because we all know this iconic game relationship between the two. So I'll go with Colby's line to Jerry that the Noxie hears on the door is Checkout Town. So yeah, I'll be checking out this voting confessional to frame it among the best voting confessionals. Survivor Africa, I chose Kelly Goldsmith's vote against Lex. I think this is truly the first where the voting confessional isn't as rigid with the attitude anymore and actually has a lot more tension exhibited from that, and Kelly Goldsmith might be among the first to establish that feat. But basically what Kelly delivers here is non-stop thrill, throwing as much as she can at Lex, wanting nothing more than for him to lose the game, and even if he doesn't go in that particular night, at least she got to cast that vote against him, and ended up saying that he is just not fun to be around. Which, I mean, the only shameful part is that Kelly did get voted off that night. However, the one good thing is that Lex did not win, meaning she somewhat manifested the truth. So if that ends with how highly tense she was in the confessional, that's why I ended up picking it. Now let's move forward to Survivor Marquesas, where the options here are not that bad. We got that confessional from Tammy who just voted for Zoe before simply not liking her. However, without a doubt, I'm selecting John Rector's vote against John Carroll, where he's like, checkmate bruh, and then follows up with some cool stuff they could do after this show is done. So yeah, pretty memorable confessional, especially with it coming from Sean Rector, so that easily is my pick for the best. Next up for Survivor Thailand, I don't want to talk too much, so my choice is going to be Shian's voting confessional against Rob with 2 B's, cause stupid people. But for serious talk, she delivers an interesting proverb about a wise man not speaking much. However, a fool speaks too much but is not very knowledgeable, and that she makes the implications towards Rob Sabatnik, especially with his constant 2 B's guys, 2 B's. No wonder she makes these humorous pokes at him, so I think the qualities of this voting confessional makes me pick it as the best. Moving forward to Survivor the Amazon, and come on man, if I didn't pick this, I'll be left dying for thirst in the Sahara Desert, where truthfully, how can you not pick the iconic voting confessional from none other than Rob Cesternino himself when he was voting out Roger, where he brought some Casey Chasm factors into his speech, which while the spiel went on a bit too long, he does end it off with nah nah goodbye, which I just love how he sells it, and it's all around great. However, from what I understand, many sort of media versions of this season would end up cutting that part out due to, I guess, licensing and copyright issues, which is a shame. However, if you were someone who was watching this season live, I bet you were enjoying that one confessional from Rob Cesternino. So yeah, that's why I ended up picking this iconic confessional as the best from Amazon. Next to Survivor Pearl Islands, and for real, it has to be Johnny Fairplay's vote against Sean, where he basically says, F you. Just straight up like that, and that automatically qualifies that as the best from this season. Like, you really can't top that off, especially with how memorable and humorous it had exhibited itself to be. Then for Survivor All-Stars, I want to cut to the chase here. I decided to pick Alicia Calloway's jury vote confessional for Amber, where in some funny context, this is not actually spoken directly to Amber. It's actually directed to Boston Rob, who's the other finalist, and Alicia recalls a time that she and Rob shook hands saying that they would never vote for each other. So then she holds aloft her vote for Amber to basically show that she's a woman of her word, meaning she never voted for Rob at all. Even though it can be looked at as bitter, it's her right with who she votes for, and also it was an interesting way how she delivered the line too, where hey, she's being honest, and unlike Rob who did vote her out, at least she stuck true to her word. And then jumping forward to Vanuatu, where there's a buffer on my head because there's just so much to choose from. We had a bunch of Eliza confessionals for Twyla, but ain't gonna select that. Amy's voting confessional for Scout, which had some interesting subtle shade. But what I ended up picking was Scout's voting confessional against Mia, basically naming her a volcano that erupts and wishing her good luck for a husband that will put up with her. Which, I mean, from what I understand, Mia was a nuisance on the tribe, so it's reasonable why Scout ended up delivering these savvy lines. So that's what I ended up picking. So next up, Survivor Palau. I'm not as solid with my choice, but I went with Ian's voting confessional for Karen, because Karen sucks. But what Ian really says here is best 3 seconds of his life. Can't wait for Karen to be voted out. And with every other confessional not really hitting for me, and this one in particular having such a strong tidbit, it's enough for me to have this as my pick from this season. Survivor Guatemala, a season that is barely talked about. And with the amount of confessionals I have not being particularly interesting, I barely can select a solid one. So although there is some good, let's just say snobby confessionals from like Brian and Judd, I ended up going with Jamie's voting confessional against Brianna, where he just names her the kind of person that shouldn't even be on Survivor and should leave the jungle and go back to the mall and shop. Which I know is just pretty basic, but hey, there was some shade to it as well, which does warrant it to be interesting. So I ended up with this one. Survivor Panama. I am iffy with my choice, which is the Shane Powers confessional when he voted for Danielle, where he gives out the line that she'll eat as much as he wants and he'll never yell at her again. But yeah, some humorous shade that he brought there, and honestly, with just how shallow most of the other voting confessionals are from this season, I just decided to land on this one as it felt more nuanced. Cook Islands, and I almost got nothing to really go off of besides this one in particular, and that is Candace's voting confessional for Jonathan Penner, because wow, piece of work. And just those basic lines ends up warranting itself as the best voting confessional from this season. Survivor Fiji, barely any to choose from, so I narrowed it down to Lisi's confessionals, which the one for Dreams is the one that I actually almost had on the list. However, I feel like there was a bit of some ickiness to it that made me feel uneasy to put it on, so I ended up choosing her vote for Liliana instead, where she pretty much threw some fun little shade saying that an alliance is 5, not 6, which fair enough, considering a 6-person alliance would be way more than half the tribe. It definitely reasons why that's the case. So by the end of it, there's not really much I can say, so my decision was to select Lisi's confessional for Liliana. Survivor China, and quite literally there's the most obvious answer. I mean, I would be on drugs sitting in an asylum if I don't pick this as the best, and that is Courtney's first voting confessional for John Robert, where she cast her votes for him because his snoring sound is like him choking on a walrus, which that is just such an unusual phrasing to describe somebody's weird snoring. But at the same time, makes things so iconic how original it is, especially from Courtney Yates herself. So with that, it's pretty self-explanatory why this one warrants itself as the best from this season. So then with Survivor Micronesia, I mean, there was some solid picks to choose from. I mean, Yao Man's Johnny Fairplace is not that bad, but the obvious choice comes down to the Black Widow votes against Eric Reichenbach. So now it comes down to who actually warrants the title of the best voting confessional, and although I like Parvati and Natalie's, there's no question in mind that Cirie Fields obviously outmatches all of them, which I mean, to be fair, there's not really much tension to it. However, the phrasing and the gesture she exhibits just perfectly captures everything well, where I think the whole sentiment where you can't really beat those with the muscles, however, you can always beat those with the brain, and I just love every second of how she exemplifies this. So with that, that is my pick from this season. Survivor Gabon, and come on, there's no question what the pick is going to be. However, I can give some honorable mentions, like Crystal's confessional to Ace is definitely fun. Ace's vote to Kelly is somewhat some fun pettiness, but I mean the bigger contenders came due to Randy Tribal, with Sugar's confessional voting for Randy in particular coming close because of how much fun there was with her rambling of negative things to describe Randy before ending it off with loser. But as usual, it's not going to outmatch Crystal's vote for Randy, which I think definitely might be up there as the best in general because of how highly tense it was, with Crystal just loudly saying how Randy has made her life hell. And I once watched an unfiltered version of this confessional, and Crystal would also proceed proceed to flip off at the screen as directed to Randy, and this just makes it so remarkable, and I just enjoyed all of the quality surrounding it. And Randy going home that night as well is also a great resolution to this voting confessional too. So with that, this was my pick. Now for Token Cheens, and it's another one that has a definitive answer, and I'm just gonna go straight to it. Coach's voting confessional against Brendan, because he truly had to make this moment very ceremonial with a brief spiel about ancient samurai and basically the sentiment that winning the war requires the dragon to be beheaded, which is a metaphor for what Coach is doing with him and Brendan, referring to Brendan as the dragon and himself being the dragon slayer. Which all of this spiel makes it really memorable and also captures Coach's dragon slayer moniker that he's well known from Survivor to this day. From Survivor Samoa, which obviously is well known for the Russell Hand show, but I didn't pick a confessional from him, so maybe preposterous, maybe out of the proportion, but I don't care. So the one I ended up picking might be another random choice, but I'm gonna select Betsy's voting confessional against Ben, because first and foremost, while she's writing on the parchment, she sings the Bad Boys song, which just loves the way how she vocalizes it, and then it's followed up with her confessional where she orders Ben not to go around using her name if he ever gets stalked by in New Hampshire, which is definitely one on the savvy level. Pretty savage of her to make this fun poke at Ben, especially how much of a detriment he is to the tribe, even though she did end up going home over him that tribal. But hey, at least something fun to leave off Survivor with. So then with Survivor Heroes versus Villains, and there's quite a plethora of solid confessionals to select from. Colby's for Candace's, that was very savvy. Courtney's vote for Coach, love her feather line at the end. Even Sandra's vote for Russell, basically making her demands for him to wash his in the ocean. But there's just one that has a convenient context surrounding it, and I'm going to be picking Sandra's voting confessional for Rupert, where she was constantly giving her orders that once she votes him out and she's sitting in the final three, he will once again give her his jury vote. And what do you know? He actually does. So that gives such a satisfying resolution to this voting confessional in particular. And quite honestly, I always loved Sandra's sass in these confessionals anyway, so that's why her confessionals are always going to be high in contention, and this one warranted that. From Nicaragua, I had some options. I mean, Ben Reed's vote for Tyrone was definitely something. His vote for Alina, referring to her as a dark squirrel, was definitely almost the one that I chose, but I ended up backing out because I think there was one that was a lot more fierce, and that is Jane Bright's confessional for Marnie. And the one in particular is when she called him disgrace to any man who is labeled as a father and would never let her babies play with his as a way to keep her family distant from his. So yeah, I think it was really relentless of her to deliver these lines, and especially with Marty going home that night, I think this was a better way to give a dramatic send-off. So then to Survivor Redemption Island, there's many more I could have chosen from. Obviously, there was Rob's vote for Francesca, which is one that's memorable, however, I don't personally click with it. There's Francesca's vote for Philip Shepard, but I decided not to go with it. I also consider Sarita's voting confessionals, because from what I know, Sarita is a very forgettable player. However, I feel like she had some amusing voting confessionals like the ones that were shown. David Murphy's vote against Sarita is notable too, but I decided to select Ralph's voting confessional for Philip Shepard, where he's hopeful that if Philip was voted out, he will enjoy his Redemption Island night with his underwear and 2 feathers, because that's the kind of wardrobe that Philip had coming into most of his tribals, and that makes that very notable, which is why I made this pick. South Pacific. There's a bevy of voting confessionals for Cochrane, but nah, I think there's just better ones. Sophie's was pretty interesting, being that I'm the new Dragon Slayer, but I think its gravity is not sticking as much compared to the other ones, which the ones I ended up narrowing down to was Edna's voting confessionals, where her vote for Michaela's basically shading her modeling career was one to note, but I decided to go for her voting confessional for Brandon, where she stated how much he failed in cleansing his family's name because the Hans family lives up for corruption, and Brandon does nothing to really break off of his family stereotypes. And with these jabs, they really fun to listen to because of how truthful Edna was about it. Although she didn't successfully vote him out, as she did go home before him, hey, at least it's something to let off her chest, as well as the fact that Brandon's family did not come to see him at the reunion as well. So this all factors into why I picked this. Survivor One World, where obviously there's only one choice I can choose from this season, and so which confessional stands out the most? I mean, most of them came off a bit too shallow considering how heavily dominated the season was. So what I ended up picking is might be a surprise. I'm choosing Chelsea's voting confessional against Tarzan because I did like her parting words being like, please get the hell off this island before driving me crazy. Which, knowing how bad Tarzan was on the season, I can get why she feels that way. And hey, since the Woman Alliance needed to get the last male out, it works perfectly as a send-off too, so that's why I ended up picking Chelsea's. Survivor Survivor Philippines. There was a number of choices I could choose from. There was Angie and Roxy's votes for each other, but I didn't end up going with. I really wanted to go for Abby Maria's confessionals for Denise. Twice, actually, but I think another one in particular just was a lot more riveting for a particular circumstance that did made it outmatch these two confessionals combined. So for that aforementioned confessional, it's Jonathan Penner's, I guess, voting confessional for Denise, where he just straight up screams her name before he even writes on the parchment. Which that aspect did kind of conflict me if I should even select this, because normally in a criteria, it should be a player holding up a parchment of who they're voting for, but this one in particular does not really fulfill any of that. However, I decided to still include it because, one, we did have an idea who he was voting for. I mean, he literally just screamed the name. So you know what, that was enough to qualify this for me to rate this as the best from this season. Moving forward to the next season, Cara Moen, and there are some memorable confessionals. Hey, let's list them now. Corinne's vote for Sherry's, Cochrane's vote for Malcolm, Andrea's vote for Brenda, but definitely I selected Brenda's vote for Andrea, which ironic considering I know Brenda was purple that season. But whatever, doesn't mean she's out of contention of giving a good confessional, and she definitely gave one right here, where she highlights Andrea's sneaky passion of preparing to blindside others, but is not ready to see hers that's about to come, which in fun context, yes, she was blindsided, but also went home with an idol in her pocket. So yeah, a fun little piece to lean on Andrea's upcoming downfall, so Brenda's confessional is the one I picked. From Blood vs. Water, there was some to choose from. Both the Lauras voting for each other, where they basically are hopeful that only one Laura will remain on the tribe. It was just such a funny coincidence there where they had the same thought process. But I didn't choose them, so what I ended up choosing was Jervis's confessional for Hayden Moss, because obviously, if you don't know, Hayden was from Big Brother, and so Jervis decided to make a jab at Hayden about Big Brother in such short words. He says that the game is not like Big Brother, and Survivor is built differently, and he's gonna get a lesson on how the game is played. And the fact that he does it out loud too, where Hayden can hear it, feels like a lot more dramaticness added to this voting confessional. But yeah, this is the one I ended up picking. Survivor Cagayan. I chose Trisha's voting confessional against Chaos Cast, where she's basically suggesting her a book on self-awareness, because that's definitely something a chaotic player needs. But yeah, a pretty sharp confessional, one that is somewhat remarkable, and although Trish did go home that same night, at least she has some strong final words to describe about Cass as she is voting for her. Next up is San Juan del Sur. I was close to picking Reed's vote for Missy, but ultimately I decided to select Missy's vote against Reed, calling him a rabble-rouser, and ends off with, and by the way, my child's not a brat, referencing Baylor, I guess, thus rendering this confessional to be yet another notable one that will probably stick out to me much when I think about voting confessionals from this season in particular. So to Worlds Apart, which can be a bit difficult because this season I know is very problematic and most of the figures took up the bulk of the voting confessionals, but thankfully I'm not selecting any of theirs. So who I ended up picking is Shireen's voting confessional against Will, because again, it's another one that has such humorous shade to it, with her basically saying they need more strengths and challenges. I mean, coming from a clip I see Will having his Wilhelm's moment of faceplant sliding down, that definitely speaks to a lot of what she means here, and she also adds on a comedian line of we need more space in the bed, which yeah, it would have been a big difference if Will was out. One less icky player in the game. But yeah, with the choices I had to base off of, I ended up going with this one. So come on, let's get to Cambodia, where I really wanted to pick Steven's confessional, where he was casting his 2 votes, but it just wasn't quite much to reach that peak. Sitting for, unfortunately, Abby and PG, since I really like their jabs at each other, but not my choice. So what I ended up picking here is Spencer's voting confessional against Wu, where it's another case where the confessional is not directly towards the person who's getting voted for, because Spencer is partially sharing his prayers that Chaos Cast's vote will keep him, as he mentioned his life lies in her hands, which adds a lot of dramaticness and suspense coming into the vote. So this does have a tad impact that I enjoy, so that's what I ended up picking here. From Survivor Co. Wrong, there's some fun honorable mentions like Sydney's to Alicia's being like she irked her soul, but I didn't pick that. Aubrey's vote for Julia was definitely the closest, being like I'm not crossing it out this time, which is humorous in the context that she did it before to switch her vote to Peter, but this time she wanted to display some authenticity where her vote is truly sticking. And sorry Julia, you fell victim to that. However, I didn't pick that, so instead I decided to go for an interesting one from Debbie Warner herself, because you cannot miss anything from this player. But my choice is surprisingly her vote for Liz, when she's like the world doesn't revolve around you, which is a line that you would hear numerous of times in the real life. But hey, it's Debbie Warner, and she says it in a fun, sarcastic way and ending it off with good luck. So I may catch some flack, but I'm picking this one. Next up, Millennials versus Gen X. I picked Jessica's voting confessional for Chris, where she basically says that he's still holding a grudge regardless of what he says at Tribal, which, hey, at least she sees right through him, so props to her read. And considering also he was voting for her too that night, she sensed it correctly. So with not much else to say, this is my pick. Now with Game Changers, and Game Changers is one that I'm not super sold on my pick, but I'm bored, so I want to go through what options was in contention. I mean, there was Andrea's vote for Zeke, where she called him out being a sucky player, but I didn't go for that. Debbie's vote for Andrea was something else, but quite honestly, I think she's outmatched by Sandra, who knows how to stay queen, so I'm going to select one of her confessionals, and the one I'm going to go with is her vote for Aubrey, which in funny context, her words spoken is not even directed to Aubrey, in particular when she's throwing jabs. She's putting a lot of shade on Tony as his upcoming blindside was orchestrated, and she just put a vote on Aubrey in the case of an idol from him as a way to counteract a potential idol play. So with Sandra just stating that her vote for Aubrey was just for safe reasons and is confidently hopeful that Aubrey will not go home and instead it'll be Tony and calling him a clown, it creates a really great thrill of what this voting confessional was shaping up for the subsequent tribal. And now to HHH, which likewise was my first Survivor season, so also here I definitely have more ideas and context with what went down. Cut to the chase with HHH. Oh my god, what is this season? Was there really much voting confessionals? Well, at least there was. And the strong contenders came down to the Rourke tribal with Rourke and Chrissy's votes at each other. But whose did I pick? I decided Chrissy's because she has a much more intriguing sentiment that she's outsmarting Miss Smarty Pants, which, I mean, she was successful because she survived over her. So I guess this makes it a tad iconic to support why I end up choosing this confessional. And from Survivor Goes Island, I mean, there's one definitive answer, but I don't mind mentioning some honorable mentions like Stephanie's voting confessional for Bradley, and then also Dominic's voting confessional for Chris because he shouts his name out loud. But come on, man. From that same tribal, I'm easily giving it to Wendell's confessional to Chris, where that one went on a bit too long, but also it's just pretty fun how Wendell continues to basically put down Chris for his rapping skills, saying that he does not have bars, and suggests him to use an eraser instead, which that's one great line to end off that jab against his profession, and probably the one and the only fun character moments we can get from Wendell. So with that, this is my pick. David versus Goliath, and come on, it'd be far-fetched if I cannot pick one from Miss Natalie Cole. Now, the question is which one I think is better, where I do like the one where she did for Lyrsa, but I feel like it wasn't as tense as the other one, so I'm picking the other one, which is her vote for Jeremy, because I just love the way she basically called him out for his fake talk, demanding him to get off the island, and ending off with that Natalie Napalm line, which is such a fabulous bloom to her character. So likewise, this voting confessional ended up being my selection. So jumping to Survivor Edge of Extinction, and I don't really know what to say, man. There's barely any that are interesting to pick from. I mean, might as well just go through them since I'm wasting my breath too much. Lauren and Rick's votes for each other, just shallow, not really adding much rivet to it. Gavin's, okay, at least it's better because it was essentially his parting words, hopefully to War Dog after everything that happened that round, but I decided not to pick it. So I guess my next option is Rick Davin's vote for Aurora, where he essentially calls her a player who refuses to work with him, which fair enough, at least it's memorable and a line that is logical sense. Even though I don't like Rick as a player, I do understand that there are points where Aurora almost had a chance to work with them but just backed off and contributed into dwindling Rick's numbers around him. So this was his tad way of getting payback to her, as also the final nail in her coffin too. Move on to Island of the Idols. I'm too irked to even talk much about this season, so I just want to get straight to the point. I'm choosing Nora's confessional for Molly, where she's explicitly giving her parting words for her strong positioning crumbling down and opening up the game for the misfits, nerds, and outliers to unite together as something that they should become. Which I think all of that was super memorable. I mean, it's coming from Nora, who has such a crazy personality, so her caliber aligns with this speech perfectly as she's delivering it. So that's where I ended up picking this. So then winners at war, and there's really not a lot to choose from, so my choice ended up being Adam's confessional for Wendell, because I don't know, it sticks out to me with how he contextualizes everything, where he knows the vote is between Wendell and himself. However, Wendell has no idea that he was on the chopping block, which also indicates an incoming blindside, and I like the way Adam phrased it there, being like, it's between you or me. I know that, but do you? Which in itself has that gravitas to set up the blindside that Wendell was going to face. So I think by that means, I guess this one qualifies itself as the best voting confessional from this season. So then for Survivor 41, and there wasn't really much strong options I can choose from, where I like JD's first confessional for Brad, where he's being pretty literal about the shot in the dark, but his second one for Gina was just pretty shallow. This year, same thing, just way too typical, like goodbye confessional in a much shallow portrayal. And I was pretty close to picking Xander's Truth Kamikaze confessional, where he voted for Deshaun, but I just feel like the gravity for it was just not holding up for it compared to another one that I just think was a bit more impactful. So what's that going to be? The Ricard confessional when he voted for Shan, where again, I think this one had a lot more impact, where it's Ricard basically giving the final send-off to his ally Shan when he made a big move against her. So his line basically saying that they gave permission to vote each other out when they had the chance. Well, Ian being the first one to pull that trigger, and also with the little like sorrowing downfall music as well, make things more somber too. So for Survivor 42, this might be a case of another pretty random choice, but then again, I don't mind making some honorable mentions like Romeo's vote for High, which was pretty interesting how he wanted to do that intentionally to create some paranoia in him. And then there's Mike's voting confessional for Drea, which I did not go with that. So I guess one of the only options left I have is Tori's voting confessional for Swati, because it's kind of in a weird situation with the context of Tori making a self-preservation move by throwing Swati on her bus just to save herself. And with Swati kind of acting a bit too cagey during the tribal council, I think is what really put the nail in the coffin that she was going to get the boot. And hey, Tori at least got to deliver the lines like how much she really wanted to work with Swati, but after everything went haywire, she just had to play for herself, which is exactly what you should be doing on Survivor. From Survivor 43, which is pretty minimal, but I think my definitive choice really comes down to Cassidy's confessionals, which, I mean, I'm not a big fan of Cassidy's game whatsoever, but hey, at least she's brought some good liners in her confessionals, but which one will it be? Well, I'm going to select her voting confessional against Gio, where obviously, although it was not shown, just to build more of the suspense part. I like the lines where she mentioned that she had the real bullets and how she put the blank in Gio's gun, and that was such a fun little phrasing for the upcoming blindside that Gio would not expect after how much overconfidence he felt about his positioning. So onwards to Survivor 44, which this season did not have a proper voting confessional. So with that, there's nothing to gauge off of. Let's just move forward. On to Survivor 45, and this is a strange case as well, where I'm not really solid on this pick, but based on the context of something that's not even related to the season, it might as well establish itself as a metaphor, or let's just say piece of instruction for future players moving forward. And what I'm talking about Dee's confessional when she voted Julie with the line of "play your damn idol," and obviously Dee knew what was going on, so she just had to cover her butt on this one, but that whole line right there is definitely an important one that future players needed to take into account. And what makes it so funny in context of the following season, which players hadn't seen 45 yet, we had a multitude of players go home with idols in their pockets. We're trying to end up coining Dee's term of "play your damn idol" because of the events of Survivor 46. So that's why I ended up picking this one as a way to clean in on its inducement for any players in the future who possess idols and are in danger. And then moving on to the aforementioned Survivor 46, and this was a really hard one. Because no offense, the confessionals, let's just say, were not really the most tense in my eyes. So spare me from the wrath with what my pick is going to be. So let's run through some honorable mentions. Tiffany's is one to take note of with her vote against Tevin, where I think the only thing that I can note from is her acknowledging Tevin's extra vote, which sometimes I forget he even had one. We had Tevin's vote for Venus confessional, where he went on a spiel, but I did not select that. So now at this point, it really came down to the votes against Q, because he's Q. But whose is it going to be? Well, it may come from the person who went home before him, but you know, I just love the energy, and that is Venus's vote for Q, because I just love the sassy tone she delivered here by basically telling Q to get off the island, which felt so old school coded, and I love that. So this is where I guess my choice ended up being Venus's confessional. And then we go on to Survivor 47, and it's another one that I have to make a strange pick, but for some honorable mentions, there's obviously the confessionals against Rome from the likes of Sam and Andy, which Andy's in particular in German because of some history aspect, but I didn't choose to go with that, so I guess my decision ended up being Andy's voting confessional against Annika, because it was, I guess, the kickstart of his underdog journey after being on the bottom of the tribe for days until he was able to find his footing thanks to Sam and Sierra, who helped craft his blindside against Annika, and him just going on a spiel with his vote basically being her headstone after burying her for 10 days really captures all of that. And for our final season, Survivor 48, which has such a minimal amount of voting confessionals I can really choose from, which is unsurprising considering the quality of the season with the absolute cordial and kumbaya stuff that just lessens the intensity of it. So without wasting any more of my breath, I'm just going to easily pick Say's voting confessional for Chrissy, because come on, you gotta love Say. She's the only one that really was carrying so much of the investment of this season, which unfortunately waned when she left. But basically, her voting confessional for Chrissy in particular is just reinforcing her semi-rivalry with her, but also brings in some game aspects of trying to split Chrissy up from her allies. So I can give it to Say for her sentiment. And unlike any other confessionals that season, which were pretty shallow, I should say, at least Sayonia was more riveting with hers in particular. So this is my choice from Survivor 48. And the last one for this video as of now. So this is where I'm going to wrap up the video for today. Feel free to let me know in the comments which voting confessionals you think are the best from every season. And likewise, I will continue trying to make more reality TV content for this channel. So if you like it, like this video and subscribe so you don't need to miss out. So with all that, I appreciate you guys tuning in.